first got into raw living foods and natural nutrition, I started to develop somewhat of an aversion to the pharmaceutical industry. Probably not somewhat, probably to a great degree, because when I got into raw food, coincidentally enough, I was working in the emergency room at a hospital in Oakland, California, of all places. Literally working in the dungeon of the hospital, surrounded by conventional doctors and nurses and medics and the whole thing, you know. And I was unveiled to some pretty scary situations. I mean, I saw some horror stories, and that's what gave me a really in-depth and experiential perspective on what actually goes on behind the scenes in most hospital settings in the emergency room. And that's why I speak out against the conventional modalities of medicine, the allopathic approach, the pharmaceutical and artificial approach to medicine and approach to nutrition and preventative medicine and so on and so forth. So anyways, one of the things that really caught my attention years ago was this idea of antibiotics and our whole obsession as a Western culture to sterilize everything, right? Because we don't understand that we're actually made up of mostly beneficial bacteria, from 10 to 1, 10 times more beneficial bacteria than actually human cells is dominant in the human body. So the word antibiotic translates into anti-life. Biotic, bacteria, life. Probiotic, pro-life, essentially. But then I started to think, as I've matured over the years, I thought about this idea of antibiotics, and I realized, you know what? The idea of an antibiotic makes sense. But it's all about how that thing is developed, how that tool is developed, and its proper application. And then I began to realize that antibiotics have actually been used throughout human history, just not in the pharmaceutical model that we use them now. And there's a tremendous amount of controversy from the time that our pharmaceutical grade antibiotics came into usage, and the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA essentially outlawed all natural-based antibiotics like colloidal silver from actually being marketed as an pathogenic tool. You could only talk about colloidal silver as a mineral supplement, essentially. You could not actually say that this was antimicrobial at all, because that would conflict with the antibiotic industry, right? So that's really interesting to me. And when you start to hear about all the misinformation on silver, on colloidal silver, you got to understand that there's a lot of money and investment going on in the pharmaceutical industry and the antibiotic industry. And so let's talk about colloidal silver for just a second here. Colloidal silver is an incredibly powerful and profoundly effective antimicrobial substance. Microbial meaning that it's antiviral, it's antibacterial, it's antiviral, fungal, it's antiparasitic. Those are all pathogens, and it affects all of it. But it's maybe the most powerful antibiotic of any antibacterial specific substance in the world. In fact, I think the irony shows up now is because what we're finding out in the hospital setting is that because of all the over-sterilization, now there's a bacterial infection called MRSA that's taking place, which is basically antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria. In the hospital paradigm, the allopathic paradigm, they have no idea what to do about it. They're trying to develop stronger and stronger antibiotics to combat the continually intelligently adaptable bacterial organisms that are evolving. We call that MRSA again. And it's like the whole consciousness around that makes no sense. And what's been shown scientifically is that these antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria can be immediately eliminated upon contact with colloidal silver. How interesting is that? colloidal silver, which has been just bastardized and misinformed ever since pharmaceutical antibiotics came into the scene. And now we're finding out that the very problem that pharmaceutical antibiotics have actually created is immediately neutralized, immediately neutered by the application of colloidal silver. So fascinating to me. And then another thing about that is that the only contraindication that colloidal silver has is that when you take it orally, it may wipe out a small percentage of your beneficial bacteria depending on the dosage that you do it in, right? That's the only thing. We know with antibiotics, though, that there's a 100% chance that you're going to wipe out a dominant volume of your beneficial strains of bacteria. That's why following antibiotic treatment, there's usually an immunological collapse that takes place after that. Not to mention the digestive infections and all the irritability that follows. Now, what would you do about that? Well, you basically would take probiotics, really great high quality probiotics, following colloidal silver. Let's talk about how to create your own antibiotic. Basically, what I used to do when I worked at the Air One Natural Foods Tonic Bar in Hollywood, California, we would make these little antibiotic shots. So we would take a shot glass and we would fill it up with colloidal silver. And then in that we would put about, if I remember correctly, we would do about a dropper of oregano oil, a dropper of olive leaf extract, and then we might even do a few drops of aged garlic extract, all of which are powerful antibacterial, viral, fungal, and parasitic tools, antipathogenic, organic, and natural substances that have a homeostatic intelligence, meaning that they're not like nuclear bombs, right? They're not just like weapons of mass biological destruction like a pharmaceutical grade antibiotic is. And so that's why I recommend that people get off the fear train when it comes to antibioticizing themselves and really start moving over to what's actually scientifically proven to be effective and doesn't have any real short-term or long-term detriments associated with it. So there you go. I really encourage you guys to take this information seriously and start making your own natural-based antibiotics.